It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, West Midlands Mayor Andy Street, Shadow Policing Minister Sarah Jones, former Conservative MP and Government Advisor Stuart Jackson, and I Newspaper Policy Editor Jay Merrick. Today, 1 year on from the first COVID vaccine being approved, Pfizer's boss says this.
Bottom line is millions of lives were saved.
One minister says this about Christmas parties.
Well, for what it's worth, I don't think there should be much snogging under mistletoe.
While questions continue about parties last year at Downing Street. After the sentencing of the murderers of 15-year-old Keon Lincoln, can we keep our young people safe?
I heard the gunshots and my first instinct was, where's my son? Those are the first words I said.
And we knew they weren't best friends, but reports say Emmanuel Macron has called Boris Johnson a clown. Let's start with those reported comments by the French president by showing you the front page and the headline in The Times. Macron dismisses the Prime Minister as clown and knucklehead. That's the Google translation of the French word gougnafier, which came out of the satirical magazine Le Canard Enchaîné. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And you can see there they have used the word against Bojo Gougnafier. This is in the wake of the fallout between the UK and France over the Channel crisis, with people crossing in small boats. Neither the Élysée Palace nor the French Embassy have denied the comment. Number 10 has responded by saying that the Prime Minister continues to be a staunch advocate, a source at Number 10, for the strength of the UK-French relationship. Our approach will not change, even if we have to wait until the other side of the French presidential election for a change of tone. That's what government sources said. Stuart, is this what's known as the entente cordiale?
Well, I think President Macron is forgetting the enormous amount of help that the UK have given France over the years in things like intelligence, security, defence. In fact, British servicemen are in sub-Saharan Africa helping the French. I think it's very regrettable, and what it speaks to is a desperate battle for his re-election. It's for domestic consumption because he's trying to guard his right-wing flank. And he thinks Brexit's a disaster. He's entitled to that view. It always was the view of the EU that Brexit was to be made as difficult as possible for the UK, and we couldn't get a strategic advantage because of Brexit. I just think that this will have a long-term negative impact on relations, even if he wins the presidential race next May.
Sarah, Boris Johnson's often criticised for loose use of language. Has he been outdone by President Macron, calling Boris Johnson a gougnafier, a knucklehead?
Well, of course, it's not helpful language. I mean, I think the point is Boris Johnson isn't a clown. He knows exactly what he's doing. He is stoking relations between the French and the English to distract everybody's attention from the fact that he's completely failed to sort out the Brexit deal, to sort out Northern Ireland, to sort out our trade agreements, to sort out the migrant crossing. And at a time when you have people dying in the waters, we have the Prime Minister tweeting a letter, you have, David Frost tweeting negotiations across the airways, you have the arguments over fish. This is deliberate to get away from the fact that the reality is Boris Johnson has dumped millions of pounds worth, billions of pounds worth of bureaucracy and red tape on our British businesses, and he hasn't fixed the problems.
Right, well, Andy Street, do you agree with what Sarah has said? Boris Johnson's deliberately stoking tensions here.
No, I don't. Well, first thing to say, of course, is that if it's true, what Macron has reported to have said, I'm very surprised. It's just not what leaders do. And my goodness, that sort of unwritten understanding that you don't criticise a fellow leader, that's been tested a lot in the last 5 years, hasn't it? But if you look at the letter that Sarah referred to, I read the letter before this. It is full of language about us working together with the French. And if you think about the biggest issues of our time, the climate change debate, where the Prime Minister led Macron was actually at his side in this. And if you think of the defence issues that Stuart just mentioned, we're actually together. The truth is there's much more that binds Britain and France together, our histories, our futures, than these current tensions.
But Andy, leaders don't tweet letters about things that serious. That is not what grown-ups do. Grown-ups, you know, and the British country is world renowned for its diplomacy and its tact and its ability to get on with nations and bring them together. This Prime Minister is embarrassing our country by the way he behaves. And of course we don't want Macron to be using language like that, but we know that the Prime Minister is doing this deliberately to make a point and to divert us from all of his failings on the international and the European stage.
Andy?
I don't think that's fair. If you think about Britain taking a leadership role in COP, for example, the Prime Minister led the British diplomatic effort, and it clearly was a success.
But we might have coal.
I read that letter as well. The letter was full of respect, and it was full of ideas about working together.
All right, Jane, is the government source right when they say nothing will change in relations and perhaps tone until after the presidential election?
Yeah, I think they have to be really careful, actually. I mean, there's a lot of posturing on both sides from Boris Johnson and from Macron. As Stuart was saying, a lot of this is about re-election. He has to appeal to the right. But Macron is ahead in the polls at the moment. There are two far-right candidates, so it could split that vote. So if he wins again, the government can't be... You know, UK government sources can't be too dismissive of Macron. And actually, what the serious point, there is a grain of truth in what Macron is saying, is that Boris Johnson hasn't been serious enough about the immigration issue.
He said publicly, hasn't he?
Yes, yeah. And I think, you know, we're less than a week since 27 people died in the Channel. They really have to sort this problem out.
Stuart?
Well, it doesn't help you have ministers of the French government actually tweeting on an almost daily basis attacking the UK government and particularly Boris Johnson. I think that what we need is a period of quiet reflection on both sides, and Macron needs to tone down the slightly hysterical tone that he's adopting at the moment in terms of the domestic audience that he's got. And he has to understand that he's isolated anyway in Europe, in that his vision of a strategic autonomy for the European Union is in tatters. He hasn't got the same relationship with the new German Chancellor as he did with Merkel. And he needs to work on that bilateral relationship, because we are friends with the French. We love France. We like to travel there. We like French culture. We're not anti-French, but we have an entitlement. We have a right to say that any government should defend its border, and it demand. We've given them £54 million in order to do that.
Well, there's always been dispute about whether they've got money,
and they haven't reciprocated.
The government have had years to sort that problem out, and they haven't done it, and their bill won't do it either. That's a sham. So we need proper policies that are actually going to fix the problem in the long term, proper routes, proper international agreements, cooperation, so we can tackle these awful criminal networks that are driving people across the...
As outlined in
the Prime Minister is nowhere near delivering, but he hasn't delivered it. What has he delivered?
As Andy said, it was a fact-based, respectful letter. Admittedly, it was tweeted, but it was going to the Elysee Palace, full of ideas, completely rejected by the French.
All right, we all look forward to that period of quiet reflection on this issue between UK and France in their relations. Let's talk about COVID. As we said in the headlines, it's a year today since the UK became the first country to approve the Pfizer vaccine. Here is the former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, tweeting, "Today is the anniversary of our approval of the Pfizer vaccine, the first in the world. COVID-19 vaccines have saved over 100,000 lives in the UK and millions around the world. Welcome news from Sajid Javid, the now Health Secretary. We've secured future supplies." Yes, that is the news, that the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is securing millions more for any future booster programmes. Of course, we are now in the middle of another booster programme in response partly in terms of the acceleration on the government's part because of the Omicron variant, which is causing concern. But this is the front page of the Daily Mail, which says, "Stop being Christmas killjoys, ministers." They are responding to quotes from the World Health Organization, which has said, or one member of the WHO, which has said that the effects so far of Omicron seem to be mild. But, Jane, that is not the full story, is it?
No, I think a lot of those quotes have been taken out of context. And actually, Dr. Maria van Kerkhove, she's the technical lead for COVID for the World Health Organization. She said yesterday that we're seeing cases of Omicron that go from mild disease all the way to severe disease. And the truth is it's just too early to say that this is a mild illness. The first people who are being infected tend to be younger anyway. They're more mobile in a population. We're not going to see this going through to older people yet. So we just need to sort of take it easy, wait for the evidence. And this is not yet declared a mild illness. Let's hope it is. But what we don't want to see is people ending up in hospital because they've been too relaxed about the restrictions that the government brought in. Right.
We heard Therese Coffey, you heard her in the headlines. The Cabinet Minister, Stewart, said she wouldn't be advising people snogging strangers under the mistletoe. Slightly surprising from Therese Coffey, one way or the other. So do you think that headline, though, is fair, that accusing ministers of being killjoys about Christmas?
Well, I'm very sad that in 12 years in Parliament, attending her karaoke Christmas parties, she never asked to snog me. I feel that's...
well, that will be the first time anyone's heard that revelation.
But the serious point is that the government has to make a decision. Can it completely eradicate COVID? And the answer is no. Can it protect the NHS by boosting the booster jabs, bringing in more vaccine, and also discharging its responsibility to the third world, to poorer countries as well? And I think the government is trying to do all those things. The fact is we do need to protect the NHS, but we cannot push the country into an economic slowdown again, because we don't know enough about the situation. The early indications are from South Africa and other places, and I accept there will be a time lag, is that the level of hospitalisations, the preponderance of serious illness is significantly lower than was originally feared. And I think it's right that the government is looking at that in real time in order to make decisions, perhaps in 3 weeks' time.
But it is too early to tell, and actually it will take 2 to 3 weeks. And what is concerning is that the early data coming from South Africa on infectiousness is this is much more infectious than Delta. So even if you have slightly mild disease but still people going into hospital, then we are going to see a lot more people infected. So we just have to take things easy and not declare this a mild illness, because it really isn't.
Well, I accept your point, a very good point about infectiousness, but that is different to the huge impact potentially on hospital beds, hospitalisation, and of course deaths, which is very sad. Any death is sad in this situation. We're at a different place than what we were potentially in March 2020.
We have,
and that's because of the vaccines.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there is good news from the World Health Organization, is that they think the vaccines, there might be some depletion of efficacy, but they will work to a certain extent. Yeah. But it doesn't mean we can just let it rip, because it is so infectious. We just have to be much more careful. And I understand that people want comfort because we're nearly 2 years into a pandemic, but you're not going to find comfort in misinformation. And I think just taking out one line from what the World Health Organization has said is not accurate.
All right, well, let's focus on the front page of The Mirror, because questions continue and scrutiny about this issue of a party last year at number 10. It says booze, nibbles and party games until early hours while the rest of us were cancelling Christmas. Andy, yesterday the Prime Minister insisted, Prime Minister's questions, that no COVID rules which were in place at the time were broken. But one person present at the party has told the BBC that several dozen members of Downing Street staff had food and drink, played party games, and that the party carried on past midnight. Both statements can't be true, can they, Andy?
No, it doesn't look like it. And if you're going to ask me which one is true, I'm going to say I can't know, can I? Because let's be clear, there are only people in Downing Street who know that. I, of course, believe that the Prime Minister has said the truth to Parliament. He understands the importance of that incredibly well. And for me, that's good enough. But you know what? I would say this here from the West Midlands. Nobody in the last 36 hours since this story is broken has talked to me about this. All people want to know is that the government are taking the right measures right now to protect us from what could, and going back to the previous conversation, nobody knows yet whether it be mild or whether it be serious, as others said. But that is what people are interested in, getting on with the delivery. And I just can't tell you how often the difference between the media dialogue and what people are actually worried about on the ground is there.
You say it's the media dialogue. Are you really truthfully saying that nobody has said one rule for the Prime Minister and the government and people in number 10 and another rule for the rest of us when we weren't allowed to socialise last year?
I have not had any correspondence or met a lot of people yesterday out and about, and it was not being discussed. Of course, there's a point of principle behind it. I understand it's why it's a legitimate question at PMQ. very legitimate, and the leader of the opposition got an answer.
Right. Sarah, what do you say in response? Is it a frivolous question? It's ancient history. Who cares?
Well, of course, it's not a frivolous question. I mean, at a point when we're asking people to wear masks again, to be cautious, the government putting out messages around being cautious over Christmas, we hear that on a day when 500 people died in the peak of the pandemic, there was boozy parties in number 10. I mean, it is just, we hear this time and again, and I think it means that people think, well, why should I follow the rules when the Prime Minister doesn't? And to your earlier point, of course, you know, there are 7,500 people in hospital at the moment. That's much lower than in previous peaks. But the Delta variant, which is still at this kind of peak at the moment, means that we do have to be cautious. And when the government, you hear, are boozing it up, when everybody else was making really difficult decisions about not seeing their families, I've seen things on Twitter today about, you know, people saying, well, my brother died on that day. I mean, this is just horrific. And it's just, I find it beyond belief that the government so often seem to not follow the rules. I just don't get it. Yesterday in Parliament, over 20 MPs weren't wearing masks. Why not? Like, how hard is it to follow the rules that you yourself have set?
Right.
I think it's deeply disappointing.
On this issue of the party, number 10 haven't denied that a party took place. They've said no COVID rules that were in place at the time were broken. I read those words out from a source to the BBC. This is getting cut through. We can see it from responses today, despite what Andy has said. What would you say in response?
Well, I disagree that it's getting cut through. I think this is another form of sort of what they call offence archaeology. I mean, it's a year ago. It's one unnamed source of given this to the Mirror. There was cut through with the Barnard Castle situation, and I think there were lessons learned there, and I think it did embarrass the government. I don't think that the electorate, who are pragmatic and practical about this, they're thinking, what's the government doing to protect me, to keep me safe, my kids' education, my pension, my mortgage, my job, etc. I don't think a few party hats and a few nibbles, now 12 months ago, is going to change the weather, Jo. I think it is different to the Dominic Cummings issue.
Jane?
The whole point is that right now people are looking forward to having those nibbles and those Christmas parties and seeing family that they didn't see this time last year. So it really will be resonating. I mean, I remember swapping Christmas presents in a freezing car park with my sister because we couldn't mix at all. People will be thinking about looking forward to this Christmas and enjoying the things that they couldn't do last Christmas, and then seeing their story and thinking, why were they able to do it when we couldn't? Yeah. It is one rule for them. Yeah. That is what people will be thinking.
And the point is, it's on top of a lot of other things, and that's what you increasingly hear on the doorstep. It's on top of promises broken again and again and again, and there's an increasing sense that the Prime Minister doesn't keep his promises, lets the country down, doesn't stick to the rules, and it's on top of lots of other issues that we've seen as well, from increasing tax to not following the rules.
Is that what you are hearing on the doorstep, that sort of cumulative effect, Andy?
Certainly not. Well, you know that the results in the West Midlands for the Conservative Party have been extremely promising recently, and I know there are challenges, but I actually believe that will continue, because what people really care about, and Jane was right in thinking that people were really distressed by what happened last Christmas. We all had difficulties, and we had to come to terms with them personally. But what people are looking forward to is a much better Christmas. And I think on the doorstep there's an understanding that the path that has been steered with an intense vaccine programme, which we're intensifying even further in these few weeks between now and Christmas, combined with a relaxing of the restrictions and the economy coming back, and we can see that day after day, and you can walk around our cities and sense people are really enjoying that people are thinking this path that has been steered has been on the whole wise.
But that's just not true. I mean, look at your lovely shopping centre in the middle of Birmingham where John Lewis is closed, you know, after 11 years of a tired government that has done nothing on the economy, that has done nothing on productivity, that has seen the decimation of many of our companies across the country. It's just not the case that the government is improving the situation on the economy. It's just not true.
I'm sorry, that is just to link the John Lewis story in Birmingham with the overall economic situation.
It's
just
11
isn't right.
years of
Hang
failure.
on, let him respond.
It's not 11 years of failure. We've actually had an extremely positive economic position relative to other European countries up until the pandemic. We did take a big hit. No one's questioning that. But the recovery is intense here. And many would say that it's fast as any other country in the G7. But I was making a broader point, which is actually people. You mentioned what's going on in this city day after day. Yesterday, Villa Park was full, the theatres were full, the Christmas market was open. People can see that contrast with where we were last Christmas and feel that the path has been steered wisely.
All right, Jane?
There is a risk for the government, because if people are thinking now and seeing this story, they were breaking the rules last year, what will they be thinking now? They'll be thinking that Boris Johnson isn't following his rules on face masks and on testing and so on. The government has to hold a line. It has to honour the same rules that it's telling people to do. They have to do it themselves.
If things are so bad, why are Labour not 10 or 15% ahead in the polls?
We'll
frankly, I mean, that is the question, and it's nonsense to this apocalyptic economy. We've got
government hasn't
GDP growth will be the highest in Europe
on the level
next year.
Other similar countries.
Employment figures. Right. Manufacturing figures, foreign direct investment. It's nonsense to say that we're in the position and the picture you paint.
We're going to end it there and talk about something completely different. We're going to discuss violence involving and perpetrated against young people. Earlier this week, a 14-year-old was imprisoned for murdering Keon Lincoln. We can see his picture there, the BBC News story. Teenagers jailed for boys shooting murder. He was a 15-year-old schoolboy in Birmingham. He was shot and stabbed outside his home. An 18-year-old was arrested on suspicion of murdering a man in Erdington in Birmingham on Monday. A 14-year-old boy has been charged with murdering a 12-year-old girl this week, Ava White. She was stabbed in Liverpool city centre. Tragically, these are just a few cases amongst dozens of others against young people who've tragically lost their lives over the last few years. Let's speak to Alison Cope, an anti-violence campaigner whose son Joshua Ribera was murdered in 2013. Welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. Can we conclude, just from those few examples and the fact that this is an ongoing travesty, that we just can't protect our young people?
No, I think we can. I think we can certainly do a much better job than we are doing. A lot of our children are walking around in fear, and I think we are failing many young people. And the long-term impact of that is they are going on to injure totally innocent people around the UK. I'm delivering as we speak in a college, and I have done for every day since losing my son. And every day our children are saying to us they think 70%, 90% carry weapons. And then when it comes to the coordinated response that we're forever talking about, we fail. We don't have the coordination, and it's causing a real obvious impact on our young people's lives around the UK.
Now, the numbers on knife crime, again, against young people fell a bit during the pandemic because people weren't out and about in quite the same way. But in your mind, Alison, is this getting worse progressively, this issue?
I do believe it is, and I think the worse it's getting, the harder it is to deal with. And I think when people sit around the table and they actually look at it, they realise there isn't one cause. There is many causes, and it's such a complex issue that they just end up going, oh, hang on a second, we're not sure what to do. We've had the reports, we've had the research. The response to this is very clear, but it's not being delivered consistently or nationally. There are some areas of the country where they're doing an amazing job, but until we make that national and thorough, we are still going to see young people falling through, and unfortunately, more murders.
Right. Can you give our viewers some indication of the causes that you're talking about? You say they are, well, there are many of them, but yeah. What are some of them?
I think there's many. So if we take one, social media is fueling a lot of young people to believe that their behaviour is acceptable, because if you have 50 million views on music videos and films that's saying this behaviour is okay, otherwise why would it be played on mainstream radio shows or video channels? And you've got one tutor, one parent saying that is not acceptable. A lot of our young people are confused and are just copying behaviour. You've then got poverty, crime, gangs, mental health issues, family, community issues. So until we address all of them to the best of our ability, then I think we are going to see more and more young people injured. And when we see the headlines over what we're looking at as minor things, but it's actually the deterioration in behaviour through society with the factor of combined with COVID, there are some very scared young people walking around believing they have to protect themselves from others, and a confrontation is resulting in a loss of life. So there are many, many factors, and we just need to work harder to save more of our children.
Alison, will you stay with us for the discussion and listen to what the others have to say? Andy, those causes that were listed, one of them was social media. There are many others. Do you think this has now become an embedded cultural problem in our society here?
So, first thing I should say is thank you to Alison for the work that she does, and indeed putting it also very clearly. And she's right, there are all sorts of causes, and definitely that whole question of some youngsters thinking it's okay to carry knives, possibly because of the social media influence, is something we have got to reverse. And that's why her work's so important. It's also why the work that's done in colleges across the West Midlands, for example, just is saying this is not right, not acceptable. That really has to press on. What's also got to happen, though, we've got to pick up some of the other causes that she talked about. And one I really want to call out, even though we're not certain of the reason that Keon Lincoln was killed. Great that the justice was done yesterday, and we don't know the exact cause, but a lot of similar incidents are around gang rivalries around drug culture. And so the work that's being done to really bear down on the whole question of county lines, 1,100 incident county lines dealt with through a police crackdown over this summer. That's got to be another real cause dealt with. And then the last thing I'll quickly say on causes is actually there is a whole piece about you can identify which people are at risk of this, and what we've got set up in the West Midlands, along with other high-risk areas, these violence reduction units where young people are going to actually think about other stakes in life, learn other routes through life. That is a good positive thing. We've worked together across the West Midlands on this, because Alison's right. All these different things have got to come together to address this.
Sarah, listening to this, how would you respond to what you've heard from Alison and this question of whether it has become embedded in our culture, knife crime?
Well, I mean, I know, Alison, from the work that I did when I set up and chaired the all-party group on knife crime, and I've done lots of work on this, and it's deeply frustrating that we know what the solutions are and they're just not being put into practice. So we've seen a 166% increase in serious violence. We've seen record drops in the number of criminals convicted. We've seen our police cut. So in the West Midlands, even with the uplift of police officers in the West Midlands, they're going to be 1,000 police down on what happened before. Yes, we have got piecemeal solutions, and Andy mentions the violence reduction unit, and that's a good thing, but they only have funding year to year. So when they're trying to work with people like Alison on long-term solutions, let's really get to the kids that are at risk here and do something about them. When you're having to commission your services and get results and show you've got results all within that 12-month period, it's just really difficult. It would be really helpful if they had 3-year funding, for example. That would be one thing. But we need to look at policing, of course, and support our police officers to do the job they need to do, and that means paying them well and having the right numbers. But we need to look at school exclusions. There's a direct correlation between people who are at risk from school exclusions. They then end up out of school, out of PRUs, out on the streets. So they're more vulnerable. At risk. We need to look at mental health, all of these things. And I think what's missing from government is they cut everything and then said, right, 43 police forces, off you go, do your thing. And have provided no national leadership to tackle this issue. We know what needs to be done. We know Alison knows how to reduce violence. We could do it.
Alison, you're nodding away there.
I'm nodding. I'd literally, if I carried on nodding as much as I want to, my head would probably fall off. But honestly, as a parent, I'll put it in a slightly different way. If the young man that had killed Joshua had had a compulsory anti-violence awareness session, I think my son would still be alive. What we are doing is spot on. The VRU do some amazing work, and then their funding is recommissioned. I have, in the last 3 years, every 6 months spoke to a new violence reduction lead. In a certain area in Birmingham, I've had 4 parents contacted me about machete carrying children. I've had 2 schools contact me about knives being brought in. I contact the VRU, and unfortunately, the staff that were dealing with that area have now got a permanent job. We now have new staff in that area who are finding their way, finding their feet. Who does what in Birmingham? Oh, let's make sure we bring this in. And then as time goes by, where are those children with knives? Where are those children with machetes? And I think that funding point is critical, because there are some amazing people that have the skills and the ability that are not working together, and it is not a long-term response. We've had the government say, I think it was 2 years ago, we need a 10-year response. Having a 12-month response has proven it's not really getting our grips on it and reducing. And I think we really need to refocus on it.
Right.
I have young, together, and together we can save children. It's as important as that.
Before I come to the other guests in the studio, I mean, Andy, are you happy and satisfied with the levels of funding in the West Midlands to deal with this issue?
So let's just be clear on one thing, and I am not the Police and Crime Commissioner, not directly responsible, but I'll still give you the answer, but I just want to make it absolutely clear, because viewers may think we have the same system as, for example, in London. So I am pleased about 2 things. Number 1 is that we are increasing the number of police officers in the West Midlands. The number is 700 up on the year before, and we're expecting to recruit about that number again as part of the government's 20,000 commitment. And it is not right to compare the number now with 2010 in terms of who is doing what and the change in responsibilities, with civilians doing some pieces. But that is good news, definitely. Absolutely. I'm also pleased that the Violence Reduction Unit, which came about, I think, 3 years ago under Theresa May's regime, which does try, as we've just heard, to bring all agencies together, has got more sustainable funding. It's absolutely right. When it was first set up for 1-year funding, that was not satisfactory. It didn't lead to the right outcomes, but that is now on a longer term, and it genuinely is bringing agencies together. And then we need to find more funding, to be straight up, about how we actually fund the diversionary pieces, so that a youngster then does go on a programme with a college which is designed specifically for people at high risk, to get them in perhaps into the world of work eventually. And there we do need to put more resource, and that's a conversation we're having.
Sarah, and then I'll come to you too, Sarah.
Well, when the uplift and the new officers have all been recruited, there will still be 1,000 fewer officers in the West Midlands than there were in 2010. There will be 300 fewer PCSOs, a few fewer police staff, who are also very important. You get a lot of police officers now having to do staff roles because we haven't got the resources. And there isn't a long-term footing for funding for the VRU. Now, there is good things going on in the West Midlands. I agree with that. They're doing a really interesting piece of work where they're putting youth workers on routes to schools so they can try and talk to young people as they go in, to try and help them and intervene if needed. But the police need the resources, the prevention needs the resources, and it's just not good enough that violent crime continues to rise, right, Stuart, and our children continue to die.
Stuart, is one of the issues here that Alison raised that it's not front and centre of every politician, every civic leader in this country to get a grip of it?
I think there's an element of truth in that. I do agree with Sarah, there needs to be long-term funding. I think there's a reactive and a proactive approach. Reactively, we did do a lot when I was in Parliament. My colleague Nick Dubois on sentencing for knife crime, on 2 strikes and you're out. That was right. But I think what we need to do is have long-term funding. We need to understand the impact of things like drug dealing, county lines, the impact on young people. But we need to probably reboot the Troubled Families Initiative from 10 or more years ago, where you're actually dealing with issues like family dysfunction, fatherless families, and the impact of social media and things like that. You can't solve this overnight. It's a long-term issue of being tough on the sentencing and going after people with proceeds of crime, but also an holistic approach to taking out of circulation those children and young people from the knife culture via things like Troubled Families Initiative.
This public health approach that's talked about quite a lot, Jane.
Yeah, I think holistic is right. I mean, what's really shocking about a lot of these cases we've been hearing about is children killing children. There should be much more uproar about this, and it's great that you're covering this today. So I think whether we're talking about resources is not just going into colleges, but into schools from year 7, is to have talks about what, talking about the culture and about social media. This needs to be going in very early in secondary school to basically try to stop these children, and they are children, from why they should be carrying knives. It's just so appalling.
Alison, final word to you.
Yeah, we've had these conversations many times. I would ask anyone from the government or anybody watching this that we need to actually put what we're saying into action and stop just having these conversations and actually do the work. And I know people are trying, but maybe a refocus, because there is a child out there that will not be here this time next year, and that is more important to society than a lot of the things that are being prioritised. So can we all just, really, really work hard to make a change and actually do it?
Alison Cope, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, and I hope politicians are listening to what you had to say, and everybody else in this discussion. Let me just show you this from the New European Independent Commission formed as Brexit isn't working. Business people, academics, journalists and a top trade unionist have formed a group with the purpose of repairing fractured UK-EU relations. We can speak to one of the co-chairs of the new Commission, the General Secretary of the Prospect Trade Union, Mike Clancy. Hello to you. Mike, your commission has been formed because, as you say, Brexit isn't working. Do you think it can be fixed, or is the entire project just a bad idea?
Well, we think it has to be fixed because this country needs to flourish outside of the European Union. This is not a question of going back over that old ground, which has had binary opinions and a lot of emotion around it. What we want to do is bring together civic society on a cross-party basis to identify what the problems have been and to offer some solutions to the government of the day as we head into what will be a review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement in 2024. So this is about looking forward and making Britain a success and dealing with the issues which have arisen. Right.
You say you don't want to go over old ground, and that's fair enough, but the Commission's launch was announced in the New European, an avowedly anti-Brexit publication. And looking at the Commission's membership, people could be forgiven, at least, for thinking that here's a group of Remainers who want to unpick Brexit. What would you say?
Right, so my own union is politically independent, and I would not be lending my name and participating in any way to which is going to be guilty of that charge. Now, of course, we all bring opinions, but I think only the most ideological or orthodox could take the view that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, put together at some haste, doesn't have some problems. Now, we've all had to deal together with the global pandemic, and that's probably delayed some of the issues actually coming to the fore. But as business has recovered during this year, we've started to see the skills shortages. We've seen friction in the trading arrangements. And I think there's more of that to come. And so, if we're honest, we all have got to put what our previous views are behind us. We've got to be then focused on what we need to do for the future. And look, in my own union, I've seen our members deeply affected by this agreement.
You will agree, of course, for people to sort of trust and embrace what you're doing. They may question, you said, people's past views, whatever they were. Is there anyone on the Commission who voted leave?
Well, I actually haven't asked everybody who's on the Commission what their previous voting pattern was, but I can assure you we will want to embrace the opinion of people who voted leave. And if you look at some people who did vote leave, they've been honest enough to say that there's issues arising, and we'll want to embrace those opinions. And because if we don't, frankly, the Commission won't be a fair representation of civic society. I think there are a few people who can say that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement doesn't need some renovation and review. All right. Well, Stuart, you voted leave. You haven't changed your mind, I don't think, since
No buyer's remorse.
No buyer's remorse. OK, well, listening to Mike, do you think he's an honest broker and the Commission is?
Yeah, it's on the face of it. If he wants to improve the relationship in business and commerce between the EU and the UK, then I'm all supportive of that. But it feels a little bit like a Remainer tribute band, you know, the awkward third album, years on. We're 6 years on almost from the referendum. Why don't you have a few people who were prominent in the Leave campaign helping the Commission to get what they can in terms of the optimum result in the relationship between the EU and the UK? And I think the answer is that it is about, at the end of the day, at least trying to get back in the single market under the purview of the European Court of Justice, taking away our policy on immigration from our Parliament to the European Union, etc. And I think that's what worries me. But, you know, if if on face value it is about improving the relationship, I think all people of goodwill should support this commission.
Is that your intention, to rejoin the single market, to perhaps give the immigration policy back to the EU? Further alignment, in other words, Mike?
Well, we shouldn't trade binary views here, because I could say, well, that's a greatest hits of the challenges that anybody from the Leave camp have put. I really can assure anybody watching this that this is about bringing together civic society, and that voice of somebody who voted to leave is absolutely welcome in this space, and in fact brings credibility to the process. Well, we know that business feels that there are challenges with the agreement. We know that we as trade unions have got concerns. My own, in terms of, for example, the creative sector and the impact on touring. That's just one example. What we should do is be honest. We need Britain to flourish outside of the European arrangements. That's what people have voted for. But to take the view that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement doesn't need some improvement would be another form of orthodoxy. So we will have a wide engagement with people, however they voted in the referendum.
Right. Sarah, you want to make Brexit work. Will you be listening carefully to what the Commission has to say and any suggestions that come forward?
Absolutely. And I mean, there's another commission on trade that Hilary Benn and others have set up as well. There's clearly a body of people, businesses, trade unions and others who want to make this work. And the example that was just given about performing artists is a really good one. We need to find a way to make sure people can be travelling to Europe and back and making money. And I think it's a shame that the government isn't providing that space for businesses and others to come together and talk about what some of these solutions are. I mean, essentially, there is a ton of bureaucracy and red tape that we need to try and unpick to make trading easier, because we've seen, you know, a big impact on, you know, the food and drink industry and others, and we need to try and unpick that and make that work. And I think that's where we come back to where we started in this programme, which is that the Prime Minister sort of throwing threats around and having public spats doesn't work. We need serious people finding the solutions.
Andy, what's the view of business in your area?
I think the view of business is that the divisiveness over the Remainers or Leavers has to be a piece of history. And we've all now got to work to make this new arrangement work. And on the face of it, that's what Mike is offering. And then if you look at what's actually happened to business here, there is no question that after the Brexit deal came through, there were some challenges to trade. Exports from the West Midlands fell in the first half of the year, but they are recovering well now. So the practical things that have to be done is build and accelerate that recovery. And if that's what this group is really going to help do, that's a good thing.
Jane?
I think Stuart should sit on the Commission, and then it would be...
Is that what you were trying to ask, Stuart, or is that what Mike was alluding to?
I'll send Mike my CV, but I don't expect him to give me a call back.
You don't? What about you? What about you, Mike?
That's a huge presumption. That's a huge presumption, if I may say so. And of course, we'll give a call back. I mean, look, the Prime Minister is talking about a high-wage, high-skill economy. Currently, we've got probably a two-speed economy. We've got parts of the economy that's overheating, and we've got parts of the economy that's capable of exploitation. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement is the premise for all of this. We need to get that right, and we need to make sure the voice of workers, the government, and civil society is heard. And really, I can assure you that we will want to embrace all of that, because making the Trade and Cooperation the best it can be is what we're about.
All right. Is it possible, Stuart, to leave the old labels behind of Leave and Remain and trust people on the other side?
I think potentially. I mean, just if you look at what we did in terms of offering citizens' rights, we created one of the most liberal and permissive regimes for foreign people working and living and being educated in this country 4 or 5 years ago as part of the TCA. So I think potentially, yes. And, my phone is standing ready for a call from Mike to serve on the Commission.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you to all of my guests. I will be back tomorrow, of course, with Politics UK at 12:15 and on Monday. From all of us here, bye-bye.